Now that title was given to me, it was not written by me. So I just want to mention to you that what we're doing here today, this whole week, is about truth, okay? And one thing that I want us to get out of the habit in, because in America I think as a human nature thing, we have a tendency to be what they call tribalistic, where we gravitate to someone that we like, and we believe whatever they have to say because we like them. And this is very much true in matters of politics and in education. So if you like a professor or you like a teacher, the tendency is to believe everything that they have to say without question, without any kind of critical thought. So what we have to remember is the purpose of education is not to teach us what to think, but to teach us how to think. Everybody understand that? There's a difference, right? So I'm going to give you a lesson today on the foundation of the states of America, the foundation of our constitutional republic. But I'm going to introduce this as an introduction for everybody's class all week. You see, how many of you enjoyed the classes that I've taught? How many of you like the way I teach? It's okay, you can be honest. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Not everybody is for everybody, right? How many of you would have a tendency, if you saw a post of mine on Facebook, because I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, and thought, oh, KrisAnne said that, let me share it. It must be true. Just be honest, right? Here's the thing. Truth over personality is the key to knowledge. Don't believe everything that I say to you today, okay? I mean, I'm not up here to lie to you. Let's just be clear. I don't want you, as a matter of fact, to believe everything that you've heard by any speaker all week, unless you take the time to verify it to be true for yourself. We can't go around repeating what people say simply because we like who they are, we admire who they are, or they sound really smart, or maybe they're the president or a congressman or your favorite TV celebrity. Truth over personality means that you take the time to discern the truth. With that being said, I will profess to you that I endeavor to bring you the truth, which is one of the reasons why when I teach, we always have PowerPoint slides with quotes from the founders themselves. Not so you can so much, see their faces and see their words, but so that you can take notes and you can say, that sounds really good, but here's the thing. Did Thomas Jefferson really say that? Did Benjamin Franklin really say that? Because I will tell you right now, there are a lot of posts on Facebook, a lot of articles in newspapers, a lot of books that are being written in which they say they are quoting the founders, but shockingly, they are not. Sometimes they just simply make stuff up and stick a founder's name on it. So it's very, very important for you, before you share something, before you repeat something, that you know the source of where this comes from. And here's the other thing that I want to say before we go on to this class. I don't want anybody, including adults here, to ever leave a course of mine and say, well, KrisAnne Hall said. Because frankly, what I say ought to be irrelevant. What's important is, what did the founders say? What does the Constitution say? What do the reliable sources say? We must be what? Truth over personality. Does that make sense? Donald Trump is not your source of information unless Donald Trump is telling you a story about his life. Right? If somebody's talking to you about the Constitution, what is the source of your information? The Constitution. If somebody's talking to you about Thomas Jefferson, what is the source of your information? Thomas Jefferson. And in a day and age that we live in today, like this, there is absolutely no excuse to not search for the truth. Because you can use your search engine, whichever you choose, and copy a quote and put it in there, and in less than 3 seconds, you have not only that quote, but you have access to the entire document from which that quote was pulled. Now, we're not going to do questions right now. So I just want to tell you this. Now, this class that I want to teach you is about the fact that we are what kind of government? All right, so let's practice. All the students, look at me. Everybody got your eyes on me? 1, 2, 3. On the count of 3, we're all going to say amen. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Amen. Amen. A little bit louder this time. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Amen. All right. Did everybody hear that? That's how I want the answers to my questions to sound. I want sound coming out of everybody's mouth. Got it? All right. We have to make sure that we're participating and we're following along because this is really important stuff. This is not simply a torture session that you have to live through so you can go play games. Agreed? This is very important stuff. So what kind of government is America?
Constitutional republic.
What's that say up there?
Constitutional republic.
Is America a democracy?
No.
No. Is America a kingdom?
No.
What kind of government is America?
Constitutional republic.
But you know what? It's good that you know that. But what does that mean? It's one thing to know what we are by title, but it's another thing to know what that means. Because you can get in an argument with somebody all day long, and that's something we like to do on Facebook and Twitter, right? I think that's what Facebook and Twitter are all about. Empty arguments. But you can say, we're a constitutional republic. No, we're a democracy. No, we're a constitutional republic. No, we're a democracy. Where does that argument go? Who learns from that? What is the end? It's important for us to understand how this works. Now, let me tell you from the get-go, this is not going to be like Tuesday. We're not going to end this class 10 minutes early. As a matter of fact, I am likely not going to get through everything in this class in this period, but I want you to know that at least the foundation of what we have. How many branches of federal government do we have?
3.
Everybody up here. How many branches of government do we have?
3.
3. What are those branches? Legislative, right? So there are 3 branches. Legislative, executive, and judicial, right? All right. So, 3 branches of federal government. How do we make sure that those 3 branches of federal government are operating according to the Constitution? We call them what? Checks and balances. But where do the checks and balances come from? The other branches. Is that the only check and balance? That's an interesting question, isn't it? Let me ask you this. If the only check and balance on the federal government is the federal government, then what is the limit of the federal government? Just itself, right? And if the federal government is its only limit, what is the limit? Say that louder so everybody can hear you.
There is no limit.
There is no limit. How many of you think that James Madison, which we call the father of the Constitution, was kind of a smart guy? Right? You think he's a smart guy. How many of you think the people who sat down, debated, ratified, and created our Constitution were smart people? Do you think it's a smart thing to create a federal government whose only check on its power is itself? Come on, everybody, say it louder.
No.
No. So why would smart people create a government whose only check is its own on its power is itself, which we've all admitted is no check at all, right? Why would smart people do that? Well, guess what? They wouldn't. And they didn't. Because you see, a government whose only check and balance is itself is not a constitutional republic. It is a kingdom. A constitutional republic exists in its function and creation so that there is a very important check and balance from the outside. That outside check and balance on the federal government, our framers are going to teach us how and why that works. The most powerful check on the federal government to ensure that it is following the Constitution is the states. Say this with me now. States. A little bit louder now. States. This is James Madison. Now, it's funny, I like to show you pictures of James Madison that you don't get to see everywhere else because quite often all we see are the portraits that were made after they were old. But we got to remember that our founders were very young when they started our independence. Benjamin Franklin, although he was 70 years old by the time of 1776, he started educating the people on the limits of their government when he was 16 years old. Most of our founders were 30 years or younger at the time our Constitution was created. So this is James Madison, and this is what he would have looked like as a younger person. He says, in the case of deliberate and palpable and dangerous exercise of other powers not granted. What does that say? Everybody now. The states have the right and are duty bound to interpose. That is how James Madison describes the process of the federal government being checked by the states. Interposition. Now, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but let me just let you know that word, interposition. Anybody knows what that means? It literally means to eclipse, just like I'm doing the picture on that screen. What does eclipse mean? Cover, say it again. To blot out. James Madison is telling us that when the federal government is operating outside the boundaries of the Constitution, it is the right and the duty of the state to blot out the authority, the fake authority of the federal government. Why? Because the states have a duty to maintain the authorities, the rights, and the liberties of the people. Thomas Jefferson says it in a different way. He says that the states have the unquestionable right to judge of its infractions. What he's talking about is the states have the ultimate right to judge whether the Constitution, that's the word "its" is referring to the Constitution, is being violated. Now, we have James Madison and Thomas Jefferson saying the same thing. It's not just enough to know that the states are right, have the right and the duty bound to do this. You have to know why they have that right. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning. a little Captain Obvious question. Which came first, the states or the federal government? States. Right? Well, that's why we know the states are the superior power, because they came first. Now, how many of you have with you pocket constitutions? All right, pull them out, get them ready. Show me the ones that you have. All right, good. On those, let me see yours for just a second, and I'll hand it to you. On these pocket constitutions, I want you to turn to page 38, okay? Turn to page 38. Adults, if you're following along, you can do this as well. I'm getting you prepared, because see, if we're talking about history, if we're talking about the Declaration of Independence, what is the source of your truth? Let me repeat this. If we're talking about the Declaration of Independence, what is the source of your truth? Which is why we have opened up to page 38, which is a piece of the Declaration of Independence. Now watch up here. We're not there yet. I just wanted to make sure you were there before we got there. The states came first. The states were not formed. Let me repeat this. The states were not formed with the signing of the Declaration of Independence by John Hancock on July 4th, 1776. The states were actually formed 2 days before that, July 2nd, 1776, when the Continental Congress, led by a delegate from the colony of Virginia by the name of Richard Henry Lee, when the Continental Congress ratified the Lee Resolution. Now here is the handwritten notes of Richard Henry Lee describing outlining the Lee Resolution. In type is the Lee Resolution. A 3-step process to declaring independence from Great Britain. Step number 1, these United Colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. Now I want you to look at that first paragraph very closely and sort of apply it to your memory, okay? Second step, we must get foreign alliance because we don't have the resource or the manpower to kick Great Britain off a land they think is their own. And step number 3, we must form a plan of what? Say it louder. Confederation. That is a very important word. Confederation is the opposite of consolidation. Consolidation means when we form something, it becomes one thing. Confederation means we form a union of separate things that stay separate while they're together. So, for example, if you get married, when you are married, your husband or wife, do you form a confederation or a consolidation? Really, when you get married, you become one person. No. Spiritually, you're supposed to be one. But physically, when you get married, what do you form? A confederation. 2 people, separate individuals who operate as one. And that's what the United States is. A confederation of 50 separate countries operating in unison for one effect. So now we know the states became states on July 2nd, 1776, which means that the states were states before everything. The states became states even before the Declaration of Independence. Now, what's interesting to know is when was the Constitution ratified? Anybody know? Well, tell me. The last state, the 9th state, signed on to the Constitution, because you had to have 9, 3/4, signed on to the Constitution in 1788. So in 1788, the federal government that we have was created. Our states became states. Is that right? No, I got that wrong. 1788, that's what I said, right? Sorry, my brain's not connecting. So our states became states in 1776. Our federal government was created in 1788. How many years is that? 12 years. Our states existed for 12 years before the government that we have today existed. Isn't that an amazing realization? How many people do you know that think that our states could not exist today for 12 seconds without the federal government? 12 years. We created independent, sovereign states on July 2nd, 1776. What does that mean? Turn to your page 38. If you don't have one, it's up here. But I want you to take truth over personality. I want you, with your pocket constitutions, to verify that I am not cheating. I'm not going to give you a quote. I'm going to share with you what the document says. It says, "We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America." Oops, wait a minute. What year is this? 1776. How come it's talking about the United States of America when the United States of America didn't exist until 1788? How many of you have studied grammar in school? When you write a document and use somebody's name, and you write somebody's name, what's the important thing that you do to that name? Go ahead. You capitalize every first letter. That means it's a what? Proper noun. Here we have United States of America. Is that referring to the federal government? No. Why? United is not capitalized. That means united is not part of the proper noun. It is what we call an adjective to describe the condition of the proper noun, the States of America. Be very careful. There are textbooks that are trying to confuse you about this fact. So there is no federal government. United is an adjective to describe the States of America. And it goes on to say that in General Congress, your Continental Congress, through the Lee Resolution, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, do solemnly publish and declare. See, we didn't become independent on July 4th. We merely published and declared what we had done 2 days prior, right? What are we publishing and declaring? That these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and independent states. Now, what are we learning from this paragraph? We are learning that our states are no longer colonies. Doesn't that mean there has to be a difference between a state and a colony? So what's the difference? The difference is, if you live in a colony, you must seek guidance and permission from the central government before you can manage your land, use your resources, make certain laws, create businesses, educate people. If you live in a colony, you must seek guidance and permission from the central government before you can do any of these things. The Declaration of Independence in your hand is telling you we are no longer colonies, we are states, which means as states we don't ask permission anymore. We are free and independent. Now, I don't believe that that's a complete enough definition for us to keep going with understanding what it means to be a state. So we're going to continue now with the Declaration of Independence. Now, I want you to follow along. Make sure I'm not leaving anything out. We're going to go from this semicolon now directly to the next set of words, that they. What is the they? The they belongs to what? Say it again louder. The states. That they, the free and independent states, are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the what? State of what? Say it with me louder so I know you got it. State of what? I want you to hear that. Because that word state doesn't simply mean Vermont, New Hampshire, or New York. That word state means Great Britain, France, and Germany. You see, when we created our states, we didn't create colonies. We didn't create subsets of a federal government. We created 13 independent, sovereign countries. Each state, in its independent capacity, carrying the same political authority as Great Britain, France, or Germany. Now let's keep going, because it gets better. We know that they are states. We know they are not colonies. We know a state is synonymous. What does the word synonymous mean? Say it so I can hear you. The same is with Great Britain, right? So it says, and that as free and independent states they have. Now we're about to list right here a whole bunch of power. Now I want to remind you, what year is this? Is there a federal government? No. So this list of power that we're about to have can only be going where? To the states. Say that again for me louder. The states. Look at the power. Full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states like Great Britain, France, or Germany may of right do. How many of you are from Maine? This is the power of Maine today. How many are you from New York? This is the power that New York holds today. How many of you are here from New Hampshire? This is the power that New Hampshire holds today. Anybody here from Missouri? All right, where are you from? New Hampshire? Where are you from?
Massachusetts.
You didn't raise your hand? Oh, I said Maine. All right, how many of you are from Massachusetts? This is the power Massachusetts holds today. Anybody here from the West Coast? What state? That's East Coast. That's okay. I'm directionally challenged too. That's fine. Where are you from? This is the power California holds. Anybody here from the central part of America? Yeah?
Michigan. We also have a West Coast, Lake Michigan.
Yeah, right. Where are you from? Anybody else? Yeah? Michigan. This is the power Michigan holds. This is the power that each and individual separate state holds today. Nothing has changed about how your state exists and the power that holds. You know the only thing that's changed? This right here. We have been taught the wrong things for so long. We no longer have the truth to believe the truth. Now, what kind of states are they? They are what? And? Independent. You know what that means? That means they don't share this power. That means Maine has all this power. New York has all this power. Michigan has all this power. They don't have to share it because they're independently holding it. This is the definition of the state. Now we need to understand, what is the Constitution? The Constitution, legally speaking, is a contract, but a very special kind of contract called a compact. Now let me explain to you how this works. A contract, from legal terms, is a legally binding agreement between two sovereign people. And when you talk about sovereign people and the law, what you're saying is they have reached the age of legal consent. How many of you here are below the age of 18? Raise your hand. I want to see all your hands. All right. If you are under the age of 18, can you make a legally binding contract? No. Absolutely not, because you are not sovereign in the eyes of the law. I don't mean to hurt anybody's feelings. You are still subject to your parents' rule. Can I get an amen, parents? Hopefully it's a benevolent dictatorship, but it is a dictatorship nonetheless. But a contract is an agreement between two sovereign people. But our Constitution is not a contract, it is a compact, which is an agreement between legally sovereign governments. Now, we've just learned, what are our states? Independent what? Sovereign governments. Our Constitution is an agreement between legally sovereign governments. So who is our Constitution an agreement between? Say that louder for me. States. Everybody now. States. The states created the Constitution. Now you're going to hear people disagree with that. In legal terms, when you have a contract and you are the agreeers to the contract, it is called the parties of the contract. The states are the parties to the contract because they made the agreement. Some people are going to try to tell you that's not true. We all know the Constitution starts, the preamble to the Constitution starts off with what words? You guys know it? We the people. So let's say the preamble says we the people. So the Constitution has to be an agreement between the people. Only that's not true. And we know that's not true by one simple fact. Was the Constitution ratified by popular vote of the people? What's the answer? No. No. How was the Constitution ratified? By 3/4 of the states. Since the states ratified, that means the states are the parties. There's now another variation of that fallacy, and people will say, well, KrisAnne, what she really means is that the Constitution is an agreement between the states and the federal government. That is not what I mean, because that is an impossibility unless our federal government is a time traveler. When was the federal government created? Shout it out. 1788. Was that before or after the states?
After.
When the federal government was created, was that before or after the Constitution was created?
After.
Say that again so everybody hears you. After. Remember, the federal government doesn't exist unless the Constitution is ratified. So the federal government, from a legal perspective, is the product of the Constitution. You cannot be the product of a contract and be the party to the contract at the same time. Because you cannot sign the contract into legal being if you do not exist until it's signed, right? So we know that the only parties to the Constitution must be what? Say it louder. States. The states, the Constitution is a compact between the states. The states are the parties to the compact. And the states, when they created the Constitution, what did the Constitution create? Say it again. The federal government. The Constitution, the states created the Constitution. The Constitution created the federal government. You know what that means? The states created the federal government. The federal government, the central government, is the product of the Constitution. The states, when they created the federal government, they created a limited and defined federal government. And then they tell us they enumerated, means they made a list of its specific powers. And when the states created the federal government and they made a list of the specific powers to the federal government, they did the most important thing they could have done next. Anybody know what it is? They reserved all other power to themselves. Now let's look at the power that is delegated. How many familiar with James Madison? Right? Tell me James Madison's nickname. Father of the Constitution. James Madison, the father of the Constitution, wrote a document we call Federalist 45, where he describes the powers that are enumerated and the powers that are reserved. And this is what he says. The powers what? Say that word together, everybody. Because this is a very important word. If you're taking notes, make stars around that word, circle it, colors, whatever you got. It's a very important word. By the proposed Constitution to the federal government are what? Few and defined. We put them in a box. He says those that are to remain in the state governments are what? Numerous and indefinite. Now, he doesn't leave it there. He's going to get really specific for us, so there is no question. He says the former, meaning the powers delegated to the federal government, will be exercised principally on external objects. That's how our drafters talked about foreign affairs. He's telling us the only reason we created the federal government was to be a unified voice on behalf of the Confederated States in foreign affairs. War, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. Now, wait a minute. Now, we've got to connect some dots. He says the powers delegated to the federal government are war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. Didn't you see those particular powers in a list somewhere else just a minute ago? Look at your Declaration of Independence. Don't you see war, peace, negotiation, and commerce in there? In that list we just read, who owns the power in the list of the Declaration of Independence? States. Say that with me louder. States. Madison's saying, look, the power that the federal government has been delegated to it. These are the powers that were delegated to it. If the states owned that power first, who delegated power to the federal government? States. Say that again. States. The states delegated power to the federal government. Do you know how powerful that is? That is so powerful because of the meaning of that word delegate. Look at it. The word delegate means a temporary trust of responsibility or authority by a higher power to a lower power. Now, we just all said, not from my opinion or my interpretation, but from the Declaration of Independence itself, from James Madison, the father of the Constitution, who delegated power to the federal government? States. Which must mean by this definition that the states are the what? Say it again. And the federal government is the lower power. Not only that, when we delegated that power to the federal government, did we get rid of it forever? What is that word right there? Temporary. When you delegate something, you trust somebody with it. You don't give it up forever. If you give it up forever, it's called surrender. Does that say surrender? It is a temporary trust. It's kind of like when you have a job, when an employer hires you, right? When you have a job and an employer hires you, say, I'm going to start a brand new restaurant. And in my restaurant, I'm going to make burgers, fries, and milkshakes. Now, if I'm Superwoman, I can make all the burgers, fries, and milkshakes for all my customers all day long by myself, right? But I can't because I'm not Superwoman. So what do I have to do? I have to hire people. So I hire somebody to make the burgers. I hire somebody to make the fries. I hire somebody to make the shake. You know what that means? I have delegated my burger power to the burger guy. I have delegated my fry power to the fry guy. I have delegated my shake power to the shake guy. What happens if the burger guy comes in one day and says, sorry, I ain't making no burgers? Do I have to hang a sign up on the wall that says, I'm sorry, customers will not have any burgers today? What do I need to do to the burger guy? I need to fire him, right? When I fire the burger guy and he leaves, do I have to hang up a sign that says, I'm really sorry, customers, I had to fire the burger guy, and when he left, he took the burger power with him? No. That's not how it works, right? Because it was what kind of authority? Temporary. When I fired him, the power came back to me. That is the relationship that the states have with the federal government. When the states, on behalf of the people, created the federal government, they hired the federal government to do very specific jobs related to war, peace, and negotiations and foreign commerce. And they said to them, this is how we want you to do this. And we reserve the right to say, if you don't do it, you're fired. Now let's look at this. The power that is reserved to the states. I mean, is something delegated to the federal government and some things reserved and other things just left out there? Because I think that's a really important question, don't you? Well, James Madison continues in Federalist 45, and he says, the powers reserved to the several states will extend to, what's that word there? All. Say it together with me now. All. To all the objects which in the, what is that? Ordinary. Does that mean rare? Does that mean special? No. Does that mean occasional? No. That means every day. And that's what he says. The ordinary course of affairs, which concerns the lives, the liberties, the properties of the people, and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the states, are what? Reserved to the states. Where does that leave the federal EPA, the Federal Bureau of Land Management, and the federal FDA? Seriously, isn't that the properties of the people? So that must be what? Reserved. Come on, we got to make these connections or it doesn't mean anything. Reserved where? What about the Department of Education, Health and Human Services, the USDA, or the FDA again? Wouldn't that also be the lives of the people? Yes. Which means those powers are what? Reserved to who? What about the FBI, the DHS, the FCC, the SEC, the FAA, the ATF, the DOI, and all the other three letters you can sling together? We're talking about the lives, liberties, the properties of the people, the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state, which means they are what? All reserved to the states. Do you know that what that means? That means that that power is the property of the states. That's what that word reserved means. If I have a chair up here and it says reserved to KrisAnne Hall, and someone else sits in this chair, what do I have the right to do? Kick them out. If the chair says reserved to KrisAnne Hall and I don't have the right to kick them out, is the chair really reserved? No. James Madison and the Constitution through the 10th Amendment are all telling you these powers are reserved to the states. That means these powers are owned by the states. Like you own a car or you own your house. It means that the states have the right to say, no, you can't use those powers. Those are ours. You can't take them. They belong to us. It means that it is the duty of the state to protect those reserved powers because the people created the states to do that. It also means that if that power is not really reserved, if James Madison is a liar and the Constitution is wrong, then anybody can use that power. That means if the power is not reserved to your state, then France can come in and tell you how to run your government. That New York can tell Massachusetts how to run their government. Is that possible? You see, in the matter of reserved and delegated powers, the federal government is just as much a foreign power within your state as France or another state. But look at this. If the power is not reserved, what is the limit to federal power? If the federal government can come to your state and say, you know what, we know that these powers are specifically written for us, but we're going to do health care today for you. We're going to control your land for you today. And you just have to take it. If the federal government can dictate what power it has, what is the limit to federal power? Say it again. None. And if the federal government must accept every demand of authority, and our only option is to petition the federal government to get our power back, are the states sovereign? Say it, everybody. No. They are colonies in a federal kingdom. See, that's why we don't have to petition the federal government to get back what belongs to us. Because in reality, look what Jefferson says. Whenever the general government assumes undelegated powers, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force. Mr. Willie has a car. You have a car, Mr. Willie?
Yes.
All right, we're going to pretend that I've just stolen Mr. Willie's car. Okay? Do I have the authority to drive Mr. Willie's car? No, I just stole it. Do I have the authority to sell Mr. Willie's car? No, because my power over Mr. Willie's car was never lawfully delegated to me, which means any act I do using his car is unauthoritative, void, and of no force. Does Mr. Willie have to ask me for his car back? No. Does he have to sue me for his car back? No. All he has to do is present the title deed, which is proof of his delegated power, and the local officials have to return the car to him as the rightful owner. What Jefferson is telling us, that whenever the federal government is exercising a power that is not listed in the Constitution, they are stealing that power from the states. It is not just unconstitutional, it is criminal. Now let me ask you a very simple question, because we're running out of time. Do the states have to ask permission from the federal government to take back what they've stolen from them? No. Do the states have to sue the federal government to get their power back? You know what? States suing the federal government for the permission of the courts is not only unnecessary, it's ridiculous and it's dangerous, and here's why. The states suing the federal government to get back what already belongs to them by contract would be like Mr. Willie suing me to get the car I stole from him, showing up in court and finding out that the judge and the jury are all my family members. Amen. Think about it. The states will sue the federal government where? Where? In federal court, with judges that are appointed by the federal government. How could we ever expect that a federal court with judges appointed by the federal government would not side with the federal government? Now, of course, there'd be honest judges that would do the right thing, but there's also the equal potential that they wouldn't, isn't there? That's why that is not the check and balance. Not only that, for the states to have to sue the federal government to get their power back, the states must first admit that the federal government is the only limit on its own power. And that's not how it works. The power is reserved, which means the states have a duty to interpose. He says duty. You know why? Because the Declaration of Independence says this. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. And that what? To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. The only reason we created the states was to what? Say it louder. To secure our rights. And when the states do not control their creation and it is allowed to do whatever it wants, are our rights secure? Let me put it this way. If you live in a kingdom, are your rights secure? If the federal government is not controlled or limited by the states, what kind of government do we have? We have a kingdom. The states are the control of the federal power. Now, we have a lot to talk about here, and we're not obviously going to get to it today. I want to show you here real quick what James Wilson says. The power of the Constitution predominates. Anything, therefore, shall be enacted by Congress contrary thereto will not have the force of law. One last thing, if I can be indulged for just a few more minutes, I want to show you the supremacy clause. Because some people will try to tell you that the supremacy clause means that the federal government is supreme over the states and everything, but that's not what it says. What it says is that the laws of the United States, which are made consistent with the Constitution, shall be the supreme law of the land. That's it. Notice it doesn't say the judicial opinions will be the supreme law of the land. Because judicial opinions are never the supreme law of the land. Law only comes from Congress. Notice it doesn't say executive orders will be the supreme law of the land. Why? Because the only body that makes law is Congress. And Congress's laws are only made supreme when they are made in pursuance to the Constitution. And when they are not made consistent with the Constitution, then the judges in every state shall not be bound thereby. The Supremacy Clause dictates that it is the Constitution that is supreme and everything else underneath it. And if the Congress tries to pass laws that are inconsistent with the Constitution, what they're saying is the government is above the Constitution. Then I have a simple question for you. If the federal government can do whatever they want and we just simply have to go along with it, why did our founders write a Constitution? Why did they put it in writing if it doesn't mean what it says and what they said it means? Our book, Sovereign Duty, covers all of this in detail. We have classes at Liberty First University. We have videos. How many of you know about C-SPAN? C-SPAN filmed me teaching this entire class in Florida. You can actually watch this entire class on C-SPAN and get the whole class that way. We have lots and lots of ways for you to get this, but this is so important because we've got to realize that the federal government is not our king, and they are not the solution to our problems. They are the source of our problems. We as a people must take back our government by the design of the constitutional republic, which means your state and local governments want to do that. You know, if you want, one last question. Do you have more power over your sheriff or Jeff Sessions in Washington, D.C.? Yes. Really? Can you go sit down and talk to Jeff Sessions? You can go sit down and talk to your sheriff. Do you have more power over your county commissioner or your legislator in Washington, D.C.?
Sheriff.
Do you have more power over your governor or over Donald Trump?
Governor.
You have more power. That's where the power lies, right? You want to kick the federal government out of your state and make it limited and defined? You need to petition your governor, your state attorney general, and your county commissioners and your sheriff. And we can teach you how to do that. Thank you, guys.